Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more. A lot of leaders think that they bring value to their teams by being in the trenches with them. But if you find yourself getting caught up in the day-to-day, you're missing out on where you actually bring the most value to your team in the strategic, longer-term big picture. I'm your host, Sarah Hicks, and today on the Predictable Revenue Podcast, I'm going to be chatting to an expert about how to get out of the weeds. He works with leadership teams to help them set and achieve their strategic growth goals with ease. He's the founder of Outfield Leadership, author of The Self-Evolved Leader, and a sought-after keynote speaker, leadership trainer, and growth advisor. Dave McKeown, welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast.
Hey, Sarah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you.
I'm really excited to dive into this topic. It's so interesting to chat about this thing that leaders often get caught up in. And I think a really great place to start for a bit of context is, Dave, if you could tell us a little bit about that book, The Self-Evolved Leader, that you wrote and kind of what it tackles.
Sure, happy to. So The Self-Evolved Leader, I wrote it for leaders at any level who felt like they weren't spending enough time really making an impact on their teams and their organizations. You know, that sense you get to the end of the day and you think, hey, we did a lot of stuff, but I'm not quite sure if it really added up to anything. And I've spent a lot of time working with leaders to help them overcome some of those challenges. And what I wanted to do was put it into book form to help leaders across the world be able to elevate their focus, develop their people, and get more done.
Cool. And one of the things that you touch on in that book is kind of the less effective, outdated management styles that a lot of people are still kind of trapped in. Can you tell me a little bit about those and kind of why they don't work so well anymore?
Yeah, I think that if you look back over the history of some of the models and approaches of leadership that are out there, there's this sense that in order to be an effective leader, you have to turn up with this huge degree of certainty that you know 100% where we're going. You're at the front, you're, leading the charge and everybody's sort of following in behind you. And I think that when those models were created, it was probably a little bit more valid and useful, but the world is just too complex. It moves too quickly now for any leader to turn up and say, I know with exact certainty where we're going and hey, just all jump behind me and let's go together. There are too many variables and people know that, our teams know that. And so it's getting less and less authentic if somebody turns up and says, hey, I'm going to lead with certainty. And I think people in organizations are looking for leaders who'll turn up and actually lead with a little bit more vulnerability to say, hey, I actually don't know everything, but you know what? We collectively can figure this out and do some really great things.
Awesome. Well, the kind of purpose of this podcast or who we're trying to help today are those kind of less mature leadership teams or the founder-led growth type companies looking to scale. So let's look at it through that perspective. And you guys listening out there, just pay close attention because now we're really going to give it to you. But Dave, you've got this kind of four-step or four-part sort of practical way that leaders can scale. What are the kind of four main parts of this modern leadership approach that you think people should be taking?
Well, let's definitely ground it in that context of high growth, founder-owned organizations. There's a tendency in fast-growing organizations that are still maybe trying to get a little bit of traction behind them. The way in which you grow is you say yes to everything and then you figure out how to deliver it. And so you're constantly, as a leader, jumping in to save the day with and for your people and your clients, because that's what brings you the agility and the flexibility that a smaller growing organization has. And that's great. It's a perfectly valid, good way to grow an organization. In fact, you might argue it's almost the only way to grow an organization. But at some point that becomes a liability. You hit a certain number of employee count or a certain number of SKUs or a certain number of geographical locations. And that notion of just saying yes and figuring out how to deliver later on, that starts to crack at the seams a little bit, because you can't just hero know your way out of everything. It's your world around you has become a little bit more complex, and so you need to begin to realize the liabilities of that management and that leadership style, and move towards what I talk about in the book, which is something that's a little bit more self-evolved. That's about saying, I'm no longer, or I shouldn't any longer be the center of this story. That actually, if you want to build a truly scalable business that will outlive you and outlast you, you have to start removing yourself from the center of the story and start building a team around you. And so I think that's a good context in which then to build these four steps.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you go about, building that story aside from yourself?
So the first thing that you've got to do is take a look at the vision that you have for your organization and your team. Often, in particularly very entrepreneurial companies, the vision and the founder are one and the same almost. It's kind of hard to separate those two things. The problem is that if the vision for your team and organization is personified in you, it's basically just you turn up and tell people where we're going, then that's a very unscalable way of growing a business. So actually turn that on its head and saying, let's collaboratively create a vision for what we might achieve together. So just depersonalizing the vision from any one person and starting to build it into a leadership team that can collectively agree on the direction you're going in. That's step number one. If you create a collaborative vision, that North Star, where the team is aligned around where you're going, that's a really good foundation for building out a scalable team or organization. The next step then is actually just to build a drumbeat, an implementation pulse to help you achieve that vision. So you start to break it down. You think, okay, well, if we want to achieve this in 5 years or 10 years, well, what do we need to achieve this year? What do we need to achieve this quarter? What do we need to achieve this month? What do we need to do today to get there? The reality is that the actions that everybody in your organization takes on any given day over time add up to whether or not you're going to achieve your vision or not. So you want to ensure that your people know what they're doing every day adds up to that. And as a leader, your job is to begin to connect those dots. Most leaders are very good at casting the high level vision of where we're going. They're usually pretty good at saying, what do we need to do today? But where a lot of organizations and teams start to break down a little bit is the bit in the middle. So, you set your annual goals and then you get together halfway through the year and you're like, I forget what it was that we said we were going to do. Are we on track? I can't remember. So you're just trying to stitch those things together. And then the final step is just to build a series of leadership disciplines to help you navigate that journey, stay that course, to ensure that you're developing your people as your team achieves their goals.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So it's about both taking a look at that really the broad big picture and understanding what the big vision is. Where are you trying to go in future at all? Breaking it down then into these kind of attainable bite-sized chunks, breaking that down obviously by year, then quarter, month, week, day. But once you're in the day-to-day, don't get pulled away. Don't get pulled away by these kind of putting out fires, as we talk about. Don't get sucked into the weeds. So what is the kind of mindset that a leader can be in so that they are sticking on track to these day-by-day goals and not getting, pulled out to put out fires?
Well, I mean, the big thing is to recognize that actually fighting those day-to-day crises and fires, there's a gravitational draw towards that. There's a pull to it for a couple of reasons. One, it's often more exciting than spending time thinking about the medium and long-term direction of your team and development of your people. It's like, oh, this sounds fun. I got to go solve this emergency. The second thing is it actually gives us an ego boost. So if we get to the end of the day and we feel like we've helped our team out of a tricky situation that day, we get to go home when we feel wanted and needed and valued and useful. It feels great, right? We get that little ego boost. But the problem is you start doing that over time. What you end up doing is you create a sense of learned helplessness in your people, which makes them say, well, I'm just going to stop thinking for myself because my boss, my leader, my manager is just going to jump in and help me out and save the day anyway. And you want to tip that on its head. And so just being really aware of that dynamic, aware of the liability that it brings to you and your team, the fact that it creates a bottleneck in your growth and you're the bottleneck. That's step number one, just realizing where it's not helpful. And then the second thing is to refocus your intention on what it means to be a great leader. So back to that original conversation or original question where we were talking about those older models of leadership, a big part of that was leaders believe that their key goal is to just ensure that we achieve our goals, that's it. That's what, you achieve your goals and that's good enough. I think we're now moving more and more to a position where in order to be a truly effective leader, you've got to say that you can help your team achieve your goals and you can help them develop and grow into the best version of themselves. And if that's your model of leadership, then actually there's no room for you being the hero because you're robbing them of that opportunity to develop and grow into the best version of themselves.
Very interesting. Okay. So, with that mindset in mind, how does a leader prioritize where to put their attention? Because of course, sometimes a fire is actually going to need your attention, but not all of them do.
Right.
So how do you choose?
It's about getting really good at prioritizing what's coming into your, virtual or real inbox on a daily basis, whether it's emails, phone calls, meetings, somebody just calling up on a random Zoom call. We have a tendency to allow anybody to interrupt us at any time and assign whatever priority they want on us. So that puts us in a world where everything's urgent because somebody's like, I need this now. And we get sucked into that. That's the allure of that. Ooh, that's exciting. Let's go, let's go work on that. Yeah, my strategic plan, I'll leave that to the side. Let's go jump in and do that. So actually just getting really good at priority management of saying what is truly urgent. Because if everything's truly urgent, then nothing is urgent, And so you think about that quadrant of this is something that's truly urgent and it's truly important. Well, that is probably a crisis and you want to attend to it. But here's the thing, even if you're faced with a truly urgent, truly important crisis, your first reaction doesn't necessarily have to be that you jump in and fix it. Your first reaction could be to say, okay, who on my team actually could do a good job of fixing this and getting them involved? Now, it doesn't mean you abdicate from that crisis at all. In fact, you want to ensure that you've got your hands on the steering wheel, but actually assembling a person or a team and hey, this is what we've got. Go deal with that. Let me know what support you need from me. I'm here to ensure that's, to ensure that we're tracking on this. That's a great way to just ensure that you're not getting sucked into that. You also give your team more and more responsibility for dealing with things and they get to grow. So just dealing with those urgent, important things in that way, those true crises, where you really add value is on those things that are really important, but not that urgent. Really important, but not that urgent. And those are the things that are always at the bottom of the to-do list. They're like, I know I need to get to it. I know it's really important, but I've got all of these things between now and that. And that is things like the medium-term direction of where you're going and building plans to grow and develop your people. And so I encourage leaders all the time, delegate your crises. Don't abdicate them, delegate them, and spend more of your time working on those important but not urgent aspects.
That's a really great way to look at it. Yeah, absolutely. We've all got those like agendas for meetings, and then there's that stuff that just stays every single meeting, and you cycle through like a brand new 2-3 issues, and then you're always like, oh, this okay, we'll do these ones.
We'll get
and
to
they
that
just
someday.
stay. Yeah, they're there for like a year, and no one ever does them.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And if it never becomes urgent, then and that's the thing with a lot of those things. Actually, you think about developing your people, it actually never becomes urgent until there's an actual performance issue or until they're about to leave your organization. So, but by that stage, it's way too late, and so you have to find a way. I think sometimes we think truly important things at some point will become urgent. That's not necessarily the case. They may never, or certainly they may only become urgent at the point at which it's too late.
When it is a crisis.
Right. And it's too late for us to do anything about it. Yeah.
Right. Oh, interesting. Tell me about the cycle of mediocrity.
Sure, happy to. So I guess a model that sums up a lot of what we've been talking about, and I see leaders get sucked into it with their teams. And it's a cycle that we get sucked into where we're not necessarily delivering bad work. We might actually be delivering pretty okay work, but we're definitely not being able to focus on the stuff that really moves the needle, truly great work. And here's what happens in this world where everything is urgent, as we're talking about. Our leaders, based on their own ego and these old models of leadership that they buy into, believe that their job is to jump in and save the day. We've got an emergency. I know how to fix it. Let's fix it. We can get back to whatever it is that we think we need to get back to. So we lead through acts of heroism, and it can be little things like somebody coming to you on your team and saying, "Hey, here's a problem. What should I do?" And you just telling them what to do, or worse still, saying, "Hey, just leave that there. I'll fix it. I'll put a phone call in. Don't worry, I got it." And those little acts of heroism over time build this sense of learned helplessness in your team, where why would I bother even beginning to solve this problem if you're just going to help out, or you're just going to tell me what to do, or worse still, you're going to come in, pull the rug out from underneath me and kind of rework or rejig whatever it is that I'm doing. And so your people, whenever they spend a period of time underneath this sense of heroic leadership, they just stop thinking for themselves. They stop coming up with solutions. That leads to frustration for them, disempowerment for them. And actually then the leader starts to look at their team and think, hey, these people used to be really competent. They used to be really capable. Why am I responsible for doing all of the work? And the answer to that is, well, you should probably take a look in the mirror, because it's at least 50% of that. And it's just this two-sided trap that leaders can get into in their team, that just ends up in burnout and frustration and disempowerment, and a bunch of those things that you want to avoid.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way of looking at it. So if the focus for a leader is not to be on putting out these fires, and it is to be, focusing on where their strengths actually are and where they can move the needle, make the biggest impact, how can a leader determine what their strengths are so they know what to delegate and what they should take on themselves?
Well, the thing is, as you look at your to-do list, you should be trying to get to the point where you're delegating out about 80% of that. So you're left with the 20% of the stuff there. And it's a real simple but not easy way to do it is you look down your list and you ask yourself, for every item on your to-do list, is there somebody on my team who, even if they needed a little bit of advice, guidance, support, coaching, could do this thing? If the answer is yes, then you should delegate it. And most people go, oh, well, it'll take them too long to do it, or they won't do it right, or, I'll just have to come in and fix it anyway. None of those are their issue. They're your issue. Those are all ego-driven responses to it. And that's what keeps you trapped in the cycle of mediocrity. And it gives you a false belief of what your worth and your value is. So you look at your to-do list and say, okay, can I delegate 80% of this? That leaves you with the 20%, which the flip side to that question ultimately then is, these things are the things that truly only you can do on your team. It's where you really, really add value. And too many leaders get trapped in that 80% of like, well, it's going to take too long to give that to somebody else, so I'll manage that. And they never get to the 20%, which is the stuff that they truly can add value. Now that can be a scary place to get to. And a lot of leaders say to me, well, if I get to this point, like, what will I do with my day? There's not enough here to fill it. To which my response is, that's awesome. You get to decide whatever you want to do at that point. And so getting a real understanding of your own wants, needs, and desires is really important in this aspect, because if you actually don't want to get out of the weeds, then you're never going to be able to pass off all of that stuff to your team, because it's just your ego's pulling you back into that. So having a real honest conversation with you about where you want to get to as a leader will help make that process work.
Mm-hmm. And so if you're delegating 80%, you've got the 20% of the big stuff left. And as people say, maybe that's not enough to fill up your whole day. How should you then spend that time, as you mentioned, growing and developing your people as a now much more important thing to do as a leader?
Mentoring and coaching. So, coaching your team through difficult challenges. And by that, I don't mean telling them what to do, quite the opposite. I mean, working with them to help them set their goals for a month or a quarter, and then building up a rhythm that says, hey, let's get together. You can share with me what's going on. I'll provide you advice, guidance, and support, and you go do it. So actually just changing the way those conversations with your team goes. If you're a leader that's stuck in the weeds, the typical conversation goes with your team. They're like, well, here are all of my issues. And you go, okay, we'll do this, do that, do the other. Whereas if you want to grow into self-evolved leader, the discussion should be, okay, well, what's your issue with that? What's the difficulty? What's your challenge? What are you struggling with? Okay, what solutions do you potentially have? What could you do to fix this? Okay, what course of action are you going to choose? How can I help and support you? And it's a nuanced conversation, but that's growing and developing them. So coaching your team in that way, and then mentoring perhaps some people that are not necessarily within your direct line of reporting. So somebody that's in another part of the organization, and just giving them access to how you think and how you approach things and how you would overcome challenges, so that they get to grow from your bank and your experience. Mentoring and coaching are two really, really important tools that a leader has to grow and develop their team.
And how do you think that the pandemic and everyone being forced to go remote has kind of impacted this type of new management style?
It's interesting. I think ultimately we'll look back and we'll see that it's accelerated it. What has happened over the short term is there have been a lot of true crises that we've had to fight. And so that has locked a lot of organizations and leaders back into firefighting and crisis management, even though now for many of them, the crises may have subsided or they may not be as strong. So there was obviously that right at the beginning of the pandemic, clearly we had to jump in and operate in that quadrant of urgency. Things then, I guess, settled down to a perspective, and leaders should have been able to get back to more of the medium and long term. But that behavioral shift of firefighting again, you have to intentionally overcome that. Mm-hmm. So if you're listening on the call and you're thinking, gosh, yeah, we've been in firefighting mode for the last 18 months and actually maybe we don't need to be anymore. You need to start thinking about, okay, how do you get back to looking at the medium and long-term direction of your organization, your team, and the development of your people? That'll be the key over the next 12 to 18 months. It's time to come out of that urgent firefighting mode and really reassess where have we emerged? How are we different? What do we want the vision to be for the next 3 to 5 years for our organization? How do we start to forecast longer term plans and get back to that horizon of focus?
What do you think that the business impact is for a company where the leader is implementing this type of strategy?
If you can implement it throughout your organization, you'll have a better chance of truly scaling your organization, because it's not dependent on individuals, not personified. Problem with heroic leadership is it means you need a person, you need a hero, you need a leader. If that leader's not in that day, the whole thing goes to pot. If you lead through acts of heroism, you are restricting your team's ability to function without you, and that's not scalable. Now, there are plenty of organizations that can grow to rather large sizes, but it's all dependent on heroes, and at some point you hit a cap on your growth. Scalability is one, and the second one is just building and fostering a positive culture that people want to work at. I think that people thrive in organizations where they truly get the opportunity to grow and develop and become leaders themselves. And so for me, that's always the two overarching benefits that I try to share with organizations and leaders who are thinking about making the shift.
Are there any examples of leaders out there that you see today that you think are doing a great job at this type of leadership?
It's funny, people ask that question all the time, and I'm always just a little hesitant to answer it, only because all we ever see is the public relations version of any leader, right? And you can say, oh, so and so is doing a great job, and then 6 months later, all of these skeletons come out. So. Yeah. But based on public image alone, I think what Dan Price is trying to do at Gravity is quite interesting. His big push is all about paying a living wage for his people, and he's taking pay cuts to ensure that his company gets to do that. It sounds like they have been able to retain employees as a result of that. There's a positive culture, but again, I don't know, because all I see is the outside. And now he's making a big push for maintaining a virtual remote option for folks. I think that Patagonia as an organization, just their perspective on impacting their community in a positive way, I think is a good example of extending that notion around beyond just like we lead just so that we can achieve our results. For Patagonia, they lead so that they can make a positive impact on the community. And that's always not always, but it's generally a good sign that there are forward-thinking leaders in the organization that are not just driven by the numbers or whatever their profit margin is for the year. And so I think that's an interesting organization to watch. But again, just caveated with, I don't know, who knows?
Yeah, watch this space. We'll see.
Right.
We're watching you, Patagonia.
Right.
You better tread carefully.
I know.
That's an interesting one. And I've been thinking about this recently, specifically the Patagonia example and the fact that they do have some other objective other than just making money for themselves and shareholders, whatever. How can a B2B company apply a similar mindset? Because obviously there's not the consumer push there and consumer attitudes that help you kind of, make those decisions, because people will want to buy Patagonia more if they're like a hiker and they're all into the environment and then Patagonia is doing good things. How can a B2B company apply that type of, do you know where I'm coming from?
I do, for sure. And actually for a B2B company to do it, that it's where it's not driven necessarily from a consumer's perspective is almost more admirable, because you've got a group of leaders coming together and saying, hey, look, we've got this business, we can make an impact. And I think it's about recognizing the role that your organization plays within the community that you're in. So, if you're just a small regional company, your community is going to be the people around you, maybe the customers you serve. If you're a big global multinational company, obviously your community is much bigger. But it's got to start from the perspective that we are not completely discrete entities, that we are connected and we impact on one another, and then start to evaluate, well, okay, if we're part of a larger community, what areas might we want to impact on? Is it education of our young people, and maybe you set up a really good intern program to get new folks into your organization. Maybe it's about the environmental impact of some of your operations, so you set up a program to offset some of the stuff that you're doing. Maybe it's something completely unrelated, and you set up a foundation that just helps to feed some of the local people in your area. But doing that not because you feel like you should, because people talk about corporate social responsibility, but doing it because you recognize that your organization is an entity and it ebbs and flows with the people around you. If you start from that perspective, you're going to get a much more effective outreach effort, because it's going to be ingrained in who you are, rather than just like, hey, this is a box ticking exercise that we should do.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up. What an interesting, conversation that we've had. We've really taken it from like the beginning, from old kind of potentially not so effective managerial styles, all the way to how you should be doing it today, the mindset you should have, how to kind of avoid getting stuck in the weeds, and now all the way to how to have kind of like conscious, socially consciousness or environmental consciousness, even though you're a B2B, product company. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dave. It was a pleasure having you on the show. If people would like to learn more from you, if they want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Best place to go is davemckeown.com. You can find out all about me, the consulting training work that I do, and you'll learn more about the book there as well.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link that as well in the show notes and the blog post so that you guys can grab a hold of it. And thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast. We'll catch you next time.